Hello, I am Julia. I am reading from my thesis paper entitled The Eternal Sunshine of the Godless Mind, A Journey into Spiritual Atheism. This was for my master's in spirituality from Mary Mac College, and I thought it would be interesting to try reading it out loud and, putting it out there. If anybody reads this, thank you, or listens to it rather, thank you so much. Please leave a comment, please leave a thought or a question so that I can see how people interpret this. All right, so we're getting into some good stuff here. This next section is titled Today's World and the Rise of the Nuns, and that's Nones. So as outlined in Richard Foster's Streams of Living Waters, the invention of television revolutionized world societies, especially in the United States of America. To have a television in your house was a status symbol, not a necessity, and it was a window into the world. News and entertainment were now at our fingertips. We were able to hear from celebrities, athletes, and politicians. TV became synonymous with American culture as families left the dinner table and watched their shows while eating meals. Religion was still relegated to churches and revivals until Billy Graham. Billy Graham was an evangelical preacher who was among the first to harness the potential of television. And with this development, his particular brand of religion was now sent right into the homes of the American public. No longer would his preaching be limited to a town, a county, or however far people would be willing to travel to see him. So in and of itself, this was an amazing use of this new medium. However, it now projected his word into homes where he might not ever have reached. He was the main player in this game. Would it be fair to say that he was America's first guru? America's first spiritual influencer? The charismatic Graham achieved an incredible amount of power and sway with the citizens as well as the politicians. So Billy Graham's legacy is best understood not in caricature, but in tension. His ministry expanded evangelical credibility within the American public life, presenting faith as patriotic, respectable, and morally serious. Yet the very proximity to political power that he normalized would be later intensified in ways that reshaped evangelical identity beyond the contours he himself had embodied. And in this sense, his role appears less as architect of later developments than as their unwitting precursor. So this section is on Jesus, John Way, and white Christian America. Kristen Kolb's DuMez's Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation, is a densely packed book explaining in meticulous detail the rise of white evangelicalism in America. With respect to DuMez, this was a behemoth task, and she leaves no stone unturned. But this book isn't really about all the people. It's about the story that white evangelicals told themselves. So DuMez argues that modern white American evangelicalism was shaped less by the teachings of Jesus than by a cultural ideal of militant Christian masculinity. Through decades of Cold War politics, evangelical media, and celebrity pastors, evangelicals fused faith with nationalism, patriarchy, and militarism. She argues this produced a religious culture that idealized strong authoritarian male leadership. Seen in this light, evangelical support for politicians was not a rupture, but the logical outcome of a long-standing theological and cultural commitments. The cultural reach of this movement was not confined to politics or pulpits. As a teenager of the 1980s, I remember the Tipper Gore-led campaign against heavy metal albums, culminating in stickers shouting parental advisory explicit content on certain records. This episode was small in scale and widely met with disbelief, yet it revealed several enduring dynamics. That those invested in moral authority would attempt to enforce their values on others. Opposition would arise, and even a small victory was enough to energize future campaigns. And as Christopher Hitchens observed, the privileges granted to a religion, simply by recognizing it as a legitimate label, allow it to interfere in public life. This anecdote illustrates in miniature the saturation of evangelical influence that DuMez documents on a national scale. Robert P. Jones also observes the effect of religion in the end of white Christian America. Jones co-joins different predominantly white denominations on the issues of abortion, gay rights, and religion in public schools. From the mid-1950s to today, there are public religious figures that have concentrated on whipping up a public frenzy over morality. Note the difference in how Jones regards Billy Graham and his son Franklin. Whereas Billy Graham exuded a relaxed confidence, Franklin became an anxious agitator, more preoccupied with adversaries than invitations, more provocateur than preacher. Unlike his father, Graham built his career by railing against abortion. It's a sin against God, okay? It's murder. Gay marriage. Isn't it sad, though, that America's own morality has fallen so far that on this issue protecting children from any homosexual agenda or propaganda, that Russia's standard is higher than our own? And Islam, a very wicked and evil religion. In my opinion, the title of anxious agitator is a fitting description for how I see this social situation developing. Jones seems to be under the impression that we are experiencing the end of white Christian America, and while I admire his optimism, I cannot heartily endorse this thought. This text was written in 2016, and in my experience, the fervor from white Christian America is only getting more fevered in both pitch and scope. The majority might be waning, but the grip is tighter. What DuMez and Joan are commenting on is a shift from spiritual practices being an immanent experiences to spiritual practices becoming increasingly external, to the point of not just proselytizing, but outright insistence that certain religious practices be observed by others outside that faith. When externally prescriptive spirituality fuses with power, coercion becomes likely. Conviction becomes insistence. Witness becomes enforcement. And this is what atheists were fighting against. This is what Ronald Lindsay was against. And some would argue that this is what the United States Constitution is against. It's a refusal of coercive authority. Tara Isabella Burton's Strange Rites, New Religions for a Godless World offers a compelling exploration of how contemporary spirituality has evolved beyond traditional institutions. Broaching new thought, cultural spirituality, feminism, social justice, transhumanist, and modern atavistic views, she paints a picture that begins positively enough, but diminishes gradually until the end of the book. And although this book is not directly about atheism, it shines a light on the delicate predicament we are in currently. This book was written in 2020, the same time as Jesus and John Wayne. However, this book is not concerned with addressing the white evangelicals, but reflecting on society at large. So similar to Hitchens, Burton jumps in with Jerry Falwell's reactions to 9/11. Back in 2001, right after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, Falwell told interviewer Pat Robertson that America was a godless nation. Quote, "The abortionists have got to bear some burden for this," Falwell said, speaking of the attacks, "because God will not be mocked. And when we destroy 40 million little innocent babies, we make God mad. I really believe that the pagans, the abortions, and the feminists, and the gays and lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who have tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen. This type of continuous incendiary rhetoric permeates the conservative white evangelical movement. I believe that commentary like this is also driving the exodus from organized religion. It's no surprise that Burton proceeds to what she calls the religiously remixed. There's people who are combining different lifestyles and beliefs to enrich their lives in 4 core elements. And she identifies the 4 core elements to common religious practices: ritual, community, meaning, and purpose. Burton writes about these 3 factors that enable this. The answer can be boiled down to 3 main factors that make this iteration of intuitionalism more likely to stick around: the absence of wider demographic pressure, the power of consumer capitalism, and the rise of the internet. All 3 have contributed to a fragmented and decentralized but retribalized religious landscape, one in which cults, fads, subcultures, and personal practices can all rearrange themselves kaleidoscopically as today's new religions. She includes a wide array of phenomena under this umbrella, from yoga and meditation to CrossFit, SoulCycle, and Star Wars. And should we be surprised? As Burton notes, today's religious nuns are not emerging in a vacuum. They are the direct inheritors of mid-century Protestant ecumenism, by and large a demographic disillusioned by the anodyne faith practiced of their institutionally minded parents. Raised amid rote ritual or hollow practice, they now seek alternative communities, deeper meaning, and spiritual authenticity elsewhere. As a spiritual atheist, I feel that this is an interesting development, providing it is not merely reassigning doctrine and dogma to other institutions. If you're exchanging one set of rules for another, you are still following someone else's rules rather than developing your own. To reiterate, there's nothing wrong with that, but one should be aware that they're doing it. 2 concepts that travel throughout the book and that make this world different are money capitalism and the internet. People start thinking differently when their basic needs are met. This is referred to as unbundling. They can spend their money on things that benefit themselves and their sense of self. Self-care in the wellness culture is paramount, and whether it's perfecting the body at the gym or yoga studio, having the right clothes and water bottle as part of the experience, or the best skincare or nutrition, those are all aspects of wellness that we can purchase and utilize. How and where we spend our dollars also shows our support of like-minded businesses and causes. The power of the dollar has been used frequently these past years to boycott companies that fail to represent their buyers. So the internet is both a blessing and a curse. The internet makes the world a much smaller place. We can find like-minded people across the globe, and for any interest one might have, there's a page for it. People can find communities, learn and develop connections. However, the positive is also the negative. It's one thing to find a community to learn how to knit, but it's very different to listen to the inflammatory rhetoric of Bronze Age pervert on Twitter. Bronze Age pervert is this pseudonymous, my pronunciation is terrible today, online figure whose writing blends hypermasculine rhetoric, anti-modern critique, and deliberate provocation, engaging with such material that requires a high degree of discernment that may not always be exercised. Burton's new religions, in addition to the wellness culture, include feminism, social justice, modern occultism, She also addresses other groups that are more concerning. The idea of techno-utopia and transhumanists involved becoming one with technology. Okay, according to the techno-utopian theology, we should act in accordance with our desires and needs and wants, not because there is an innate spark of divine within us, as in the New Thought tradition, but because there isn't. They conceive of a world where humans and technology are one and obliterate the idea of the self entirely. This not only non-theistic civil religion, it's not the only non-theistic civil religion rising up in America. There's also modern atavism. Atavism is defined in Oxford as a tendency to revert to something more ancient or ancestral. This modern take is a neo-reactionary movement, also known as the Dark Enlightenment. This movement is mainly agnostic, and they look backwards to a different sociological time. They tend to lean towards traditionalism, authoritarianism, and established gender roles. They blame feminism for their lack of status and idealize their white maleness. They are sworn enemies of most of the remixed, and yet they are completely remixed themselves. Burton does an admirable job laying out the main players in today's social dynamics. Her writing resonated with me because as someone who deconstructed and was on the path toward atheism prior to the internet becoming as pervasive as it is today, it's fascinating to see how it all lines up. In my lens, there is very little rhetorical difference between the white evangelicals and the modern atavists. That might seem unfair to some, but from the outside looking in, I see massive issues with control, power, influence, and greed. It is far removed from our simpler definitions of spirituality. Philip Sheldrake, in A Brief History of Spirituality, observed, "This recent breakdown of closed systems of thought has also underlined the ways we think are necessarily bound up with power issues." As history shows us, Christianity has fractured many times, and the same could be said for most religions. This raises a series of questions that haunts the edge of faith. Who really holds the power? And what are their motives? There's a profound difference between scholarly inquiry and internet reaction. Scholars argue carefully. They disagree, revise, and correct each other with accountable communities. Their work rarely moves at the speed of social media or television, nor does it aim to. Online discourse, however, thrives on immediacy and certainty. Into that space steps not only the uninformed, but the intentionally inflammatory. Those who recognize that confusion can be cultivated and outrage can be profitable. This isn't just about white evangelicals or nuns. It's about who gets to define meaning in public life. Does the squeaky wheel get the grease?